Note making helps you, and to the various methods that I'm going to introduce you to, how it starts helping you and preparing you for thinking critically. The other big thing about note making is that, when you look at your modules and you look at the textbooks that are assigned to you, you tend to get overwhelmed by the volume of information. So note making helps you to summarize all of the reading material you get from your study material, but also from textbooks that have been assigned to you to utilize during your course of study. And through note making, you get to identify key concepts and ideas through the material that you're going through. It's also meant to help you with retention of information, right? So it's not just about learning the information and then regurgitating it, but also learning it with meaning. And you can only learn something with meaning is if you understand it and comprehend what you're reading. And most times it's best to do that when you are doing it with your own handwriting, and you're sitting there and you're reading through something, you're trying to grasp it, you're trying to make sense of it, and then you write it in a summarized form, right? And in this way, you build on your knowledge, and then you're able to tackle, far more complex issues later on as you move from first year into second year, and then of course into third year. So critical thinking is not something you're just going to suddenly start developing in your fourth year or in your honors. You need to start developing it from the get-go. As you read, you must be able to ask questions about the information that is coming to you. How true is this information? You need to contextualize that information. When you read it through a textbook, you don't really get an opportunity to do that, because what ends up happening, the overwhelm from all of the information that you need to take in, forces you to commit it to memory, what we call learning it by heart, right? Or rote learning. So like I say, note making is not just about just writing everything you hear, everything that you read down. It's about taking something and synthesizing it and saying, what is it that I understand? This person made 50 points, for example. What are the main take homes for me that I want to take out of this 2 pages that I've just read? That's the point of note making, right? So what that process involves, it involves you to read. Then you're going to have to review. You'll also have to connect. I always say this in all of my workshops: read to understand. Don't just read something, read it and say it back to yourself. And you say it back to yourself by reviewing what is it that you understood by what you've just read. And you, in this way, you're synthesizing ideas, not only from tutorials, if you're lucky enough to attend your tutorials, but also from any of the information that is being given to you via your textbooks or via your study material. So when you make notes, it requires you, and it involves a very actively an engaged student. Whether it's tutorials, whether it's in your own study, your individual study period, or in your lectures itself, or in any manner, even if you're sitting in a meeting, when you write things down, you'll also find that you retain what you've written down, because your brain remembers that act of writing down, right? You also get an opportunity to read through what you've written down. And it's also, because it's in your own words, there's a connection that you make there. This then is used for the revision of your work. Nobody wants to go to a textbook and study the entire textbook, because not everything in a textbook has to be studied, and not everything can be tested on. So, we use our brain in a way that says, okay, this sounds important because this is written in bold, this is written in italics. How can I summarize this even more so that I can understand it better? Remember, the information you learn here is not just so that you can tick a box and say, I've passed, module 101. It's about you being able to understand that information, read it, understand it, and then put it into practice in whichever context you're going to be finding yourself working one day. So the understanding and comprehending of what you're learning is vital, as is your ability to have clarity in thinking. It's important to understand that note-taking, you might ask, so why must I take notes? What's the importance of taking notes? I've mentioned this just now about when you have large volumes of information, that note-making helps you to break down large volumes, right? And also, when you have such large volumes, you'll end up trying to cram all of that information in, believing that, I have to know everything that's in this textbook in order to pass the exams. So one of the things that note-making makes you do, or forces you to do, is to learn the art of summarizing, the art of extracting the most important information on a page or in a section, right? But it's such a unused tool. It's so effective, yet people just do not use this enough. People don't, they see it as, why do I need to make notes when it's already written there? No person can, read from their textbooks and just remember everything. So the whole point of taking making notes is for you to be able to look at the information and draw maybe even a mind map from that information to summarize it even further. Because what ends up happening is towards exam time, and I've watched this, I've witnessed this, students end up looking in their textbooks and then they start making a whole lot of notes when you could be doing this during the course of your year, right? As you do a new section, you write a summary on it. On that summary, you do a mind map. And that mind map is really a gauge for you to see how much of this content have I understood and that I can actually remember and write about. Your notes is something you will use for revision. So as part of the note making, for me, it's part of a study skill where I might be lucky enough to go for a tutorial lesson. I come and I read and consolidate that information. And I often say this, before you even go for any kind of tutorial or lecture or study period or study, if you're studying with a group of people, read before you go. So there's a pre-reading that happens. Then there's an actual exchange of information that happens, whether it's you listening, reading your own work to yourself, or being part of a study group or a tutorial or even a lecture if you're lucky enough. That's the second time that you're going to be, making acquaintance with that information. And then you get home that evening and you consolidate that information. You might also use that information for a fifth time through maybe an assignment. Then you'll have a tutorial question to answer. That's the sixth time you're going through that same information. And then the seventh time you might be writing an exam. 7 whole times you would have gone through that information, not through the whole textbook, but through the summaries that you would have done after every section of the work. Can you see how it actually starts breaking down the volume of the work? It starts making it more easy. It makes it more accessible for you, and it lessens the anxiety. When we're anxious, we can't get anything through our brains because we're too anxious about not knowing and not recalling. So when we have notes, it actually alleviates that anxiety and it makes the work more approachable by yourself. Thick textbooks, I've never gone through one chapter, I'm not going to be able to find the time, etc. But when you start making note making a habit, it becomes part of your study techniques, right? So students do spend a lot of time making notes, but this tends to cut into their time. And I say put in extra time for each section that you're going to do per module. What this ends up doing, and studies have shown that it actually helps you to perform better, but also, like I was saying earlier on, it helps you to feel more confident about the information that you've just studied or that you have to be tested on. So note making, there's not just one method of note making. I'm going to introduce you to about 5 note making methods. You can either use one method or a variety of methods depending on which module you might be studying. Some modules require different kinds of study methods. And just take note that note taking involves different stages, right, that have to be included. And it doesn't matter what medium you choose and what method you choose, but you have to write down the information. You have to question that information or contextualize its logic and the source that the information comes from. You also have to reflect on the information that you've just read and then summarize it into your own words. And then another process has to happen again where you reread that summary that you've done, and then you reflect and you ponder and you try and respond to some of the questions you've asked yourself as you were doing the note making. Before you start a new chapter, so I'm just going to do a before and a before and a during with you. Remember that I spoke about pre-reading earlier on. So what I say is when you do the pre-reading, just skim through the chapter. Look at what the chapter entails. They say the chapter is on fixed assets and current assets, and you're trying to understand what that actually means. So just skim through it, look at the bold, look at the italics, and start making notes around that, maybe even a mind map around that, because you can either do it the other way around as well. You can do the mind map first and then get notes on the mind map, or you can do the notes first and develop a mind map afterwards. So you're reading through it, you're looking at any session notes you might have had, then you sit where you can actually see or actually hear. So the lighting needs to be good where you're sitting, because that also affects students. When you're sitting in a room that's dark and you're trying to read your textbook, you might make the excuse of, oh, I can't see what I'm writing, so my eyes are getting sore, so I'm not going to write those notes, I'll do it tomorrow. We know how we can procrastinate, and we find reasons to procrastinate, right? So make sure that your cell phone is off, that there aren't any distractions, that the TV isn't on, that you aren't in a place place where there are students that are trying to speak to you or trying to get your attention, just make sure that the study environment is conducive, that you have all of the information you need. So your textbook is there, your study material is there, as well as all of the materials like a pen and a highlighter and sticky notes and all kinds of paraphernalia that you might use. And then decide, what note-taking system do I think is best for this particular module? And you can change this, the note-making system per chapter if you wanted to see which one actually suits me best, which helps me to retain information better, which one is more easier on my fingers, because some note-making systems require a lot of writing, right? Also, you may then vary this according to the subject matter, or not subject matter, this the module that you are doing. During the study period, now, this is where you're actually making the study notes. You're actually using a particular study note-making method to do the notes. So some of them require to date it, to number each page, and to identify the main topic. But as you're reading, listen actively, meaning, listen to yourself after every paragraph. Try to make sense, actually making a concerted effort to make sense of, what did I just read now? This particular chapter told me the difference between fixed assets and current assets. An example of a fixed asset is this, and an example of a current asset is this. Businesses might have current assets, blah, 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 blah. So you see that, okay, I'm now reviewing and I'm reflecting what I've just said. So I've understood that paragraph. Let me move to the next one. And you might only have that on your page, fixed and current. Right? Those are the only two words. But the moment you see those words, it will start triggering a whole lot of facts that you've read to understand, You'll be able to flesh it out and talk about it. Try to use abbreviations and codes if you can, so that it helps you to speed up your writing. Make sure that you leave a space in between some of your main ideas. And also when you might have missed an idea, because you can also use your tutorials as a guide here when you're using a textbook, for example. And then you start writing down the main ideas and details, and you create a mind map of each section. Now you might say, okay, so how would I go about doing this? How do I start making, using a note-making method and start summarizing my notes that I have? So the top 5 that I've taken out for you to utilize in your study are the following. There's one called the Cornell method. There's one called the outline method. Another is called the boxing method. Then we get the charting method, and then the mind mapping method. Just before we go on to understanding those 5 methods in more detail, it's to remember that, note making is not something you can do once off. It's something that you've got to do on a continuous basis for any particular module. And you might be wondering, but then how am I going to know what's the best method for me? Well, the only way you're going to find out is if you try different methods and you see which one actually works for you. What does help is if you know your learning style. So if you're a visual learner, for example, you'll know that mind mapping might be a style for you. If you're somebody that likes writing and you're good at taking notes, the sentence method might be good for you. And so that's how that particular selecting of a method actually would work for you. If you're somebody that's very visual, for example, you might like writing notes. You might want to write you might even like the box method, for example, alongside the mind method, and try both and see which one actually appeals to you. The whole point of a note-making method really is because it's a repetitive process. It helps to aid in you storing information. And remember, information that's only read through once can't be stored. It's not retained by the brain. It's not retained in long-term memory. The brain recognizes information that's only read once as short-term, and it discards that information. But when something is done in a repetitive way, over and over again, like I mentioned earlier about the pre-reading, then you go into the lecture or to the tutorial, or you start a study period on a particular topic, and then afterwards you consolidate the work. That's how the brain starts recognizing that this is important information. I need to take this information and I need to put it into long-term storage. Only if information is in long-term storage can it be retrieved. You can even do this with a friend. You take a friend's phone number down, a cell phone number down, and you'll find that after 10 minutes you might be able to remember the whole number, but after an hour you might be able to only remember 8 out of the 9 numbers, and so forth. And as the day goes, by the evening you might only remember 6 of those numbers. It's because the brain recognizes that was only said once to you. It's not important. It needs to discard it, right? It can't keep all of the information that it hears every single day. The other part about note making is that it's also part of your exam preparation, because when the exam comes, you don't want to start making summaries. At that point, that study period, that 6 weeks before the exams, you want to actually have all your notes in order filed so that you can go through just the notes and start, walking around with just mind maps and looking at a mind map and looking at one word, and that triggers off a whole lot of information. And this is really, note making is really good for people who are doing lots of theoretical subjects. So if you're doing, lots of modules that has lots of theory attached to it, then this note-making method will really work for you. And like I said before, you can use more than one method per module. So when you do the Cornell method, for example, here it requires you to divide your page into 3 or 4 sections. And then you start from one row at the top for the title, and I'll show you here, right? So you're starting at the top with the title and the date. It's optional to put the date, and then you can put this a line at the bottom. Then you add 2 columns in the center. As you can see on the screen, there's 1 column on my left and there's 1 column on my right. Then all the notes from your tutorials or any class that you might be attending or any study group you might be attending, this must go into the main note-taking column, right? You can see here. And then the smaller column on the left-hand side, this is for your questions that you're going to be asking, any keywords that you want to remember from the paragraph you might have summarized, and any other comments or hints that you actually want to put in there. I'm talking about this one on my left-hand side that says keywords and questions. Here is where you will write down your questions about what's written on the right, right? And so after the chapter that you've reviewed, you should actually try and take some time to summarize the main ideas of a page or a paragraph or of the chapter or the section that you've read, and you put that here where it says summary. What are the main points of this particular chapter that I've read? And then you list them here so that when you go back to your notes, this section, remember that every textbook has 20 to 30 chapters. So you want to be able, in your title here, you want to be able to say what the title of that chapter is. You will know which module it is. And then here at the bottom where the summary is, you want him to say, okay, so in this section of this book, on this chapter, this is what the main ideas that were discussed. And that summary then should be able to help you to know what that entire chapter contains. If you look at any book, go to the back of each chapter, you will see there's a summary there. That's what this part is speaking to, right? So that's mainly the Cornell method. And yeah, obviously, when you're writing down your main notes, these are summarized. These are not a replication of what's written in the textbook. You're going to read a paragraph and then you're going to summarize that. You're going to put down your key thoughts about what you think this particular chapter or this particular page is trying to explain to you. You're not going to just use one of these pages per chapter. You might use more than one page, but it certainly won't be 30 pages. Right? Some of you might be saying, how am I going to study when I have an essay type question? You can apply a similar method to essay type questions. I personally prefer the mind mapping method because that helps me to put like 5 or 8 pages of work into one page where I will recall a particular concept or particular word that helps trigger 4 to 5 facts for me, that helps me compile my essay. So what are the pros and cons? So to take notes, to review your notes, as well as to organize your notes. It does summarize all of the information in a very, very systematic manner. It also promotes effective learning. So it allows you to take in bulk information in a much shorter period of time. And then you also, through the summary, you are able to extract the main ideas, which means that it cuts down your time and you don't have to review the whole chapter. Remember, when you have back-to-back exams, it's very difficult to go through, the whole textbook, let alone maybe, a whole chapter. So when you have a summary like this, you're able to go through it and feel like, I'm familiar with this work. It's written in your own handwriting and you can connect. And remember, if you're a visual learner, use bright colored pens, use those sticky notes that come in, all of the neon colors, so that you are able to actually get a visual image of your work as you're trying to recall it. Lots of people can actually remember every word that they've written on a page and bring that into mind as they try and remember what they've studied. The cons about the Cornell method is that you have to prepare these. If you're going to lectures, you have to prepare these before time, but even before a study period that you're planning on. If you're planning on studying a chapter for your economics module, you're going to have these pages beforehand. What I tend to do is I do one on my computer and then I print it out, and then I have a whole lot of them if I need it for whichever study, for whichever module that I'll be doing. So the other thing about this, the downside about the Cornell method is that it requires a lot of time for the reviewing part and the summarizing part. So you might find yourself feeling like, okay, this feels like I'm doing the whole chapter anyway. But really, summarizing is a skill that you will learn through this process, and you also need to be willing to want to learn and practice different note-making methods, and not just the one note-making method, because you won't know which one actually suits you unless you try them all. The next method is the outline method, and this is a very linear method, and a method that's really good for if you're somebody that likes compartmentalizing, you like things being in a particular, if you're very systematic, and it works well with all of those theory subjects. And this is usually the method that everyone says, no, I prefer the outline method. It's much more easier. I don't have to be prepared well in advance or anything like that. Somebody that likes keeping things tidy, very pedantic about that. Remember, this method is very organized because there's headings and there's bullet points, and then you write things straight down on the page, and you can actually do different topics as well as there's subtopics on one page. It might also be useful as a study technique when you're first being introduced to new information, especially when you're a first year. Doing the outline method helps you to kind of organize the information. So what was the main topic of this particular module, right? What were all of the subheadings or the subtopics of this particular section? And this is the thoughts or the questions that I have, or supporting facts that I have about this particular section in the work. Many modules, for example, in law, might not require you to have an opinion, but it's good for you to have that opinion, because I know some law subjects expect you just to regurgitate what's in the textbook, but it's good for you to use a method similar to this. Because a lot of the law subjects are very theoretical. So you use this, and you can put that at the bottom, as a subheading, you can put, what are my thoughts around this particular case that I've just written out, and the theory that I've applied to this case. What are some of the supporting facts? What do I agree with in this particular section? What do I not agree in? Remember that when you're at university, there's an expectation that you will have an opinion, that you will read something that has been empirically tested and researched, but that you will still have an opinion about it, and that you can bring in your own thoughts, and that you can contextualize that information. So you've also got to read very widely, not just in your textbook. So here is where you might introduce what other people have said about the same topic, right? So the nice thing about this is that it lets you organize your notes in a very structured form. It helps you to save a lot of time for further reviewing and editing. And what ends up happening is that you start off with just writing the main topic, as I said, and you can use the top of the page or the far left of the page, and then you can add on a subtopic that's related to it, and then your bullet points below by using your right. Now, many people will say, but I don't write this way. I might have to type this way. You can, if you want to type on your laptop or on your tablet, then you can use this indenting method as well. The pros and cons of this method particularly are that an advantage would be that it highlights the key points of your reading in a very logical and systematic way. And this allows you to become a lot more focused on just the main points. And hence you don't have to keep on reviewing, you don't have to keep on editing. And so it's, the notes are clean and there's more structure to it. And then a nice thing to be able to do is, instead of using a mind map, you can use cue cards, just to cue your memory about a different subtopic or maybe the main heading. The cons about this is that not all subjects are suitable to it. For example, chemistry and maths, these comprise formulas and charts, so you might not be able to use this particular kind of method. If you're somebody that's sitting in a class or in a tutorial, if you have access to that, then you're going to find it very difficult to use this method when you're trying to take down what somebody's saying. And you also need to be familiar with your content. So that's where that and I'll go back to this point about the pre-reading comes in. So if you're familiar with your content, then you can use the outline method. So this particular method is new. Not many people use this particular method or know of this method. You would have seen in that video that I showed you, they talk about the sentencing method, which people might be more familiar with. So the boxing method was developed for digital tools, but you don't only have to have a digital tool. You don't have to have a boxes. I like the way it actually looks visually. As you can, I don't know if you can see that you use boxes. Can you see how it's on a iPad here, where you group information together, right? So all your thoughts and ideas and concepts of a particular topic then are written down vertically next to each other. This is the boxing method that I was talking about. So the notes are all obviously interlinked and they're related to each other and they're grouped together in a box. Can you see that? And you can stack them on top of one of each other, but they will obviously be linked in. What's nice about this is that you can speak about one idea in a box and then move on to another idea. And you can say, okay, one section of notes is going to go into one box here. What are the main ideas that we'll discuss in this particular chapter? Chapter 1, so maybe chapter 1 will get one whole box. Chapter 2 might get another box. However, it's very difficult to get so much information into one box. It can be daunting as well to be able to look at all of the boxes together. And also, as my notes are saying, it's not suitable for all of your lecture types or all of your module types. Some modules you can't use this boxing method because it doesn't work really well for every single topic you might do. It's also very time consuming. And if you're not a visual learner, then you shouldn't be using this. This works really well. It's just like the mind map would work well if you're a visual learner. If you're an auditory learner, the boxing method is not going to work for you. The nice thing about it is that it does separate and organize the notes in the form of boxes. It lets you focus on one box at a time while you're reading. And it helps you to memorize the relationship between notes in a very visual way. So you see how it appeals to a visual learner. If you take notes via your iPad, I know those who have iPads, one of the digital that you could use on your iPad is called Good Notes. It's a brilliant app. I think it's actually free. And you could use this particular method if you have a pen, of course, one of those iPad pens, or if you have a tablet, maybe you can also download Good Notes. It's G-O-O-D, Good Notes. And then you can actually use this kind of method on your tablet. But barring that, I think also that there are various other apps that might also have these kind of note-making methods which you can look at and then download. If you're a visual thinker, it's actually convenient to have notes on different topics separated, because this helps you to remember them better and helps you to retain and recall the information that you need and when you need it. Also remember that you're going to confuse yourself if you have too many boxes on one page. So don't overload the page with too many boxes, and try to make sure that you focus on only one box at a time, and make sure that the boxes are not too long or there's not too much information in one particular box. So that's the boxing method. Then on to the charting method. And this particular method is really nice for when you have large volumes of theory that you need to learn, right? Because you're able to condense the information, and you're able to talk about various topics, and you're able to organize that information utilizing the blocks. And I'm going to show you a pic of that just now. So what happens is that you start splitting the table up into several, or your page up into several columns, those as well. And then each of those blocks that you have, they are filled with summaries of information. And this is it here. This is what that one does. So this is just using the 5 different methods that I'm speaking to you about as an example. So can you see if you were discussing this particular topic today on note making, under your method section, you would put down the different types of note making, and then you would have a column that has describing the method, when to use that method, the pros and cons of the method, and so forth, right? So similarly, when you have a particular topic, you might want to list all of the topics down here, all of the chapters down here, you describe the chapter. This obviously would change according to your subheadings or questions that you have on the topic, and you will then complete the information there, right? So you can also use, for example, like a spreadsheet if you wanted to, and each of the columns have its own category, and each row will have its own topic, like you're seeing here. Like here, each one is talking about like the outline method, the Cornell method, and so forth. So this results in a note format that enables efficient comparisons between different topics and different ideas. And this is really an ideal method for notes that involve a lot of information. If there's too much for you to kind of go through, this particular boxing methods will help consolidate and organize the facts so that you can learn it off by heart. And this is really for people who have large volumes of theory that they need to commit to memory. And that's the only time I would actually recommend this particular kind of method. I don't think this method is good if you're sitting in a workshop or if you're sitting in, a lecture and you wanted to take notes. It doesn't really help because you don't know which way the information that the lecturer is going to take the information. Whereas if you're sitting with your book, you know exactly how each chapter is written out, and you're able to then utilize this method. The downside about the charting method is that it does take a lot of time. It helps, for example, if the information is clearly structured, it helps you to do that. It helps you to review the information because it's all on hand. You're able to see information across different topics all on one page. You can compare things, and if you want to try it out, just try something. Let's say you're looking up the price of a fridge. In your method section here, you'll write down, LG, an LG fridge. You might write down a Samsung fridge. You might write down a DeFi and then some other name, and then you'll describe it. What are the pros or the advantages or disadvantages of having this particular kind of appliance? How does this appliance help you? What are the benefits of having this appliance? So you can break it down, or you can even put the price if you're comparing the price. So this is very nice if they're asking you to do a comparative analysis of something, then you can use this kind of method depending on the question. And that's the other thing I meant to mention is that sometimes in your tutorial letters, you will feel, or your tutorial guides, you will see there are several essay type questions. When you have those essay type questions, you can also apply one of these methods to answer that particular question, so that when it comes to the exam time, you actually have that information on hand, and it's information that corresponds directly to the question that's being asked. And the nice thing about this is that there's a lot of information that you can summarize and learn off by heart in a pretty quite quickly, actually. The cons about this is that as you can see, time-wise, it's very time-consuming. Sometimes you can barely make sense on how to apply this method, especially when you don't know the content beforehand, or the content is not clear beforehand, and it doesn't work for information that can't be easily, you can't categorize the information easily. You have to know the information well enough to know how you're going to categorize it. And hence I said it works well when you're doing a question on a comparative analysis, for example. The next method is the mind mapping method. I particularly like this method, I think, because, this is visually, for a visual learner, the mind map method works really, really well. You can take a single fact and then you can break it down. As you can see here in the middle, I have a globe, which is the main topic there. And then off that, you've got about 6 other topics, which is as originally says text here. Text, you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and off those I have further subtext off here. What this actually means is, if I have my topic here, right? Let's say my topic is on depression. Up here, I might want to say, what's the epidemiology of depression? And I might name the facts here, that the epidemiology means that it's more common in males compared to females. So I'll put males, females, or I might just put males. That will tell me males. I might put here that it's between the ages of 16 and 35, Down here, I might put, for example, what's the etiology? So here I might put the etiology, down here I might say etiology might be that it's genetic, that it's caused by stress, and I might put another keyword here. So when I see these words here, and I see, okay, etiology, I know it's the causes of depression. And what are some of the causes? I know, okay, I'm going to speak to genetics. And off that word, just that one word, genetics, I'm going to talk about the family history of depression, how it's hereditary. I might talk about how it's influenced by, if I'm talking about the stress factor of depression, I might then talk about how people's environments, family problems, personal issues, etc. So one word helps trigger off a whole lot of other information for me that I can write with. So the mind mapping method really works well also as in the previous method, the charting method, where there's large volumes of information, factual information or theory that you need to commit to memory and then have to regurgitate. The pros of this is that it's very visually appealing. You can use it to note things down, even if you are trying to sit in a tutorial and you're trying to make sense of what the lecturer is saying. You can just quickly do a mind map and you can write down the main key points and then go back afterwards, and then you can flesh it out and add information to that. It can also be used for noting down any other detailed information, but more in a more concise form. And also the mind mapping method allows for more editing to be done of your notes. I also like it because it's a quick go-to. I can just, in the morning of my exam, I just go to my mind map, and I know for this section, if I've forgotten something, one of those little points here that I mentioned earlier on will trigger my memory, and I'll be able to remember it, right? The cons is that you might run out of space because there might be too much for you to write on one page. It can also be confusing if you place the information in the wrong spaces, especially if you're somebody that's taking notes down. So make sure that you're copying correctly, or that if you're hearing somebody speak about a topic, that you're actually taking down the information correctly. So that's the 5 note-taking methods. I just quickly want to go through the benefits of note-taking, as well as some abbreviations and how do you take better notes. I can't emphasize this more than I already have. Repetition is key to understanding the information, to retaining it information, right? Remember what I said about pre-reading, consolidating, and also for purposes of retaining information, you have to review, you have to reflect, you have to ask the questions. And the more you do that, the more the information is passing through your brain more than once. Remember that when you cram, it doesn't work, right? What does work is that you have to constantly and consistently review your information. For some visual learners, they like pictures instead of words. If you find that a picture triggers your memory, then use that, right? Draw an image. People often do those, they call it doodling, I think, around their work. They draw flowers, they draw little animals, and when they try and retrieve that information, their page actually comes to mind with that doodling on it. If you like color coding, use coding, but remember that when you're doing the initial note-taking, you don't want to use too many colors, you don't want to use too much of doodling, because then you might focus on the doodling and the colors as opposed to the content, right? Make sure that when you are writing that it's succinct. Don't make long-winded sentences, because that makes you lazy, I think, and makes you feel like, okay, this is no different to my textbook. So make your sentences very, very short. Use abbreviations and symbols if you can. Much as possible, try and use your own words so you know that you understand the information. And I always say this, you don't have to commit much to memory if you understand or comprehend what you've read, because you can always write it in your own words. And remember, the way the exam question is written, it's not written exactly the way it is in your textbook. You might have to extract information from chapter 1, chapter 5, and chapter 15. So if you read it with understanding, you are able to extract information from those 3 chapters to be able to answer a particular chapter. When you write things down, when you question things, it means that you're looking at something critically and that you have an opinion to offer. Some students say, but I don't know much about the subject matter. How am I going to critically, give my own opinion? I haven't done my own research. Look at what other people are saying about the same topic. We are living in a digital age. You have Google. Did I lose people now? You have Google. Yeah, you have Google. So you make use of Google and find out information about a particular topic that you're doing, right? Use your study guide, use your notes, use your textbooks as a starting point and a way to familiarize yourself with your topics that you have to study. But make sure that you utilize a note-making method that you are comfortable with. You don't have to use any of the 5 that I've shown you here. You can go research and go do other, look at other note-making methods that might be more suitable to you, but use something that makes sense to you, but brings down the volume of the work and helps you to have a quick go-to. Write down your questions. but don't try to write on every single thing that you're reading. You have to learn the art of extracting the most pertinent pieces of information from any section of the work that you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to suffer from what we call information overload, right? The next page speaks to just some abbreviations that you could use. Obviously, this is more to do or more helpful if you are in a lecture, but also when you're writing down your summaries on your note-making page, you can use these as well. Instead of writing and out completely, you can just use the ampersand, for example, right? And instead of writing the word percent out, you can just put in that particular symbol there. The benefits of note-taking is that it keeps you alert, meaning that you're active throughout your studying, as opposed to just trying to read and reading a chapter that has 30 pages. It can make you feel quite despondent. It can make you feel tired and lazy and unfocused and lose concentration really quickly. Try and switch between reading and writing. Especially because people that are easily distracted or people who are sitting on a bed, for example, can feel drowsy, that they can't study. The other thing about note making is that it forces you to engage your mind, because by listening carefully and deciding on what you're going to include in your notes, this means that your mind has to be active in order to do so. It also helps with you organizing the information, because as you take notes, you're going to decide what are the key ideas here? What am I going to highlight? What structure is this going to be taking? So you are able to look at the supporting points. You are able to identify what are the key things that I actually want to put down there. So it requires you to be very actively engaged with the information, right? And with that is the understanding and the retaining and so forth. Sometimes when you are reading, you might find that you don't know how to write a sentence out, or you don't know how to summarize that. Read it again. And if you still don't understand it, read it again. And then if you can't get to a sentence, just write the key points in that particular sentence or paragraph that might help trigger you, right? It also creates a condensed record for study, because a set of concise, well-organized notes, we know everyone wants that, right? It gives you, though, confidence. It gives you a feeling that I am organized and I have my work all in place. I just need to go to it and I need to start learning and reviewing that information. I can't emphasize more than what I've emphasized in terms of the repetition. I think you must become familiar with the work that has been given to you. Don't wait till the end of the semester to start opening up your study guides or your textbook. Start making yourself familiar now already, so that you start knowing what is in terms of how much information do I actually have to prepare to be ready for the exam. And whatever approach you're going to use to make notes during your class session, remember that you must still engage actively in the learning process. So attending tutorials are important. Like I say here, just like exercise is done to keep you fit, you also have to learn in order to be able to pass that exam and ace those papers that you're doing. And I think I'm going to leave this right here now. The other thing I just wanted to mention was, when there's large volumes of work, I know for some people who do business management, for example, sometimes they have a whole 5 theory chapters. What I say to them is, come together in a group, write allocate a chapter per person, write a summary of it, photocopy it, and then share it amongst yourself. So and that helps to save time and helps to bring down the volume of the work. So when you walk in, with one chapter summarized, and you walk out with 5 chapters summarized, just by virtue of adopting some kind of note-making method, but also getting a study group together. And this is when the note-making method actually becomes quite useful. I think that's the end of our workshops, and I'll take any questions that anyone may have. Yeah, that's a good comment there. I think that's another thing that I forgot to mention, is that when you have that learning unit, there's an overview. So there's a learning outcome of a particular section. So you know what those learning outcomes or what you need to actually know about a particular section of the work. And that's a way to check yourself. Okay, I've gone through that, I've gone through that, and I've gone through that. Yeah, that's another example. Thank you for that. Yes, you can. It depends. I can't really answer that for every module, but I think it depends on what section you're actually doing, what key concepts are. Because for me, I think I would personally feel that a key concept is something that I have to know, because it pertains to the other other parts of the work that's explained in the rest of the chapter. So key concepts for me, especially the stuff that's in bold, the stuff that's in italics, for me, those are parts that I'm going to pay attention to, and I'm going to know that this is something that they want me to know. So remember that the volume of work increases as you go from first to third year, right? What you're expected to know. Even your level of critical thinking it's higher at that level that's expected of you, because they believe you've gone through, 2 other years of undergrad. Now you must be able to think for yourself. You've gone through other information. You must be able to use information from second year, for example, that pertains to the same module in your third year, and be able to extract information across different modules as well. So you have to also, even though you pay attention to your learning unit, I must emphasize that it's important to also go beyond that, to look at what else is out there, even in terms of the research that's been done, so that you develop your own critical thoughts about a particular thing. Because remember, when you're reading someone else's handwriting, or even something that's written in typing, it's very difficult to remember that. When it's in your own handwriting, you remember how you make your T's and how you make your Y's. And funny enough, when you're studying for the exam, your words and your pages come to your mind, and you can almost see your work, especially when you're a visual learner. I think it's important for students to understand how your learning style affects how you learn information, how you retain it, and how you retrieve it. Try to engage all the senses. So, for example, I forgot to mention, when you are struggling with something, go to a YouTube video, find a YouTube video on it, and try and listen to it. Even if you're not an auditory learner, try and listen to it. You need to engage all senses when you're learning, not just your eyes and So we do a learning styles workshop, but you can also book an appointment with the counselor and say to them, listen, I want to understand what's my learning style. How can I go about learning what my learning style is? Well, we also run a learning styles workshop here. My colleague, Ms. Chitty, runs a learning style workshop, but I don't know if it's in this series, because over the next few Tuesdays, we're running several different workshops. And in April, again, we'll be running the same, some workshops, but also different topics. So learning styles might be something that she's running. I'm not quite sure, and I can't confirm that. But it certainly is a workshop that we run, and she helps you to identify your learning style. But she does a different learning style. She doesn't do the auditory, visual, kinesthetic one. She does the Kolb's learning style, which is also very effective. And that one also helps in terms of understanding yourself, even when you're working, and how you work with your colleagues and so forth. So look out for that workshop.